Hello everyone, this is Erik, the Asian movie enthusiast, and this is my review of Mukuro, a Japanese horror anthology from 2015 that consists of 3 short films with a total runtime of about 1 hour and 14 minutes. I actually reviewed this anthology a few years ago in my Asian horror playlist, but at that time, the only way to watch it was through the Japanese DVD, which had no subtitles. But thankfully, this recently got an English-friendly Blu-ray release, so I'm now revisiting it. Now, some of the plot synopsis information I use here was paraphrased from psychocinematography.com, which reviewed the film on their website. They may have been how I heard about the film originally a while back. So, before getting into the short films themselves, I need to point out the opening credits, which are only about 1 or 2 minutes long. Very high-energy punk rock music and stylish letter fonts. Quite different. It gives the feel of an independent horror film with an attitude, and that's basically what this is. This has a low-budget grime and harrowing tone to it that is similar in some ways to those nastier Japanese horror films, many of which were torture films that came out in the mid-1990s. I say that because at times the violence here is pretty offensive, and the dramatic content is very basic, but that does not necessarily mean that it's bad. On the contrary, it is rather entertaining if nastiness is your thing. Now, the first short film is titled Home Inferno. It's about 19 minutes long. One day, 3 guys meet up to kill a high school girl. They are successful and mutilate her body. Later that day, one of these guys finds a different girl in that apartment who enjoys the taste of the dead girl's flesh. That's a pretty morbid premise, so it's no surprise that this has a dark tone, and it incorporates no comedy or humor really at all. Dialogue is pretty minimal in this one, and the use of lyrical music makes this segment feel kind of like a music video in spots. A little bit odd, but it is effective. The stories for all of these short films are simplistic, but I did enjoy how this one plays out. For what is essentially a torture flick, there are a few bits of intrigue, like how this cannibalistic girl is going to impact the crew of murderous men. Now, in terms of horror, this showcases human organs and gore, as you might expect. The quality of the violence is good overall. They lean heavily into practical effects instead of CGI, which I appreciate. That's a good thing. And as an added bonus, there's a Christmas light aesthetic inside of the apartment. I quite liked that. You see the Christmas lights pop up a few more times in the other films in this anthology, but they're not used to the excess that they're used in this one. So I enjoyed the first segment here. Now, the second short film is titled Sweet Home Inferno. It's 28 minutes long. Nozomi is born in a very strict religious family. One day, they confine her on the suspicion that she is a devil, and that in order to save her, they need to violently exorcise her. So this actually has a good amount of dramatic content to it, which kind of sets up the violence. Certainly the most nuanced story of this anthology. It's not really saying much, but it is certainly more nuanced, and it does have a few surprises. The graphic gore continues to be displayed here, but the use of pleasant music and joyous reactions from the family members gives the violence a bizarre mix of effects. It's weird and gory, but also blackly comical. Quite demented, I liked it. Very different tone when compared to the first segment, and that contributes some variety because if every single story had a really harrowing, nasty tone, the violence would likely become monotonous, but Mukuro does avoid that problem, so I did enjoy the second segment as well. Now, the third short film is titled Just Like a Mother, 26 minutes long, and the plot is as follows. After her mother moves out of town for a while, a daughter loses contact with her and becomes worried. She receives a phone call from someone with information, goes to a shady location, and gets into some serious trouble. Now, this is perhaps the most darkly toned segment. It has some disturbing scenes of sexual assault, and it has a disturbing bloodiness to it as well. There's a scene involving someone's hand, probably the most gratuitous gore scene of the entire anthology. I mean, it drags on and it is nasty. But I guess that's kind of what we watch movies like this for. Consistently grimy stuff, but it is engaging, even though it's basically just a nasty torture flick, really, at its core. I did like it, but this is the most exploitative and disturbing story of the bunch, I think. Now, if you're into nasty, violent Japanese horror movies, Mukuro is one to check out. You know, it has the gore that you want, but I think the anthology structure helps it to avoid becoming too monotonous. That tends to be my biggest problem with movies like this, you know, which I've discussed many times, covering films like Tumbling Doll of Flesh and Flowers of Flesh and Blood. I cover those in my Asian horror playlist. Mukuro actually did hold my interest, and it has enough variety to it to kind of avoid the flaws in those aforementioned films. So for that reason, I do recommend this, but only if you're into this kind of film, you know, very violent, harrowing movies. Now, as I alluded to earlier, this was recently released on Blu-ray from Error 4444. They retitled it to the Mukuro Trilogy, because I guess there's 3 films in it, but the trilogy is the 74-minute long package here. They also changed the order of the short films. I think the first film and the third film were swapped on the American release when compared to the Japanese DVD release. I'm not sure why that it was like that, but just something I noticed. But in any case, nice to see a movie like this get a release in the West. Low-budget, grimy Japanese horror flick. Why not? If you eventually watch it or have seen it already, let me know what you think. And as always, folks, I'll see you next time.